My name is Yolanda. I'm part of the Women's Economic Imperative group, and I have the pleasure to welcome you today to the Women's Entrepreneurship Policy Roundtable series, which is the second in our series and is in collaboration with GWEB, represented by Colette Henry. Well, it's great to see we have a good audience. We've got a really good response to this second one on women's entrepreneurship policy through a cultural lens. And it's going to be a very interesting hour that we're going to spend together. So what I'll do now is just simply hand over to Colette, who will introduce the speakers and the panelists, and wish you all a wonderful session. Thank you very much. And Colette, over to you.
Thank you, Yolanda. And again, can I just say, wherever you are in the world today, wherever you're joining us from, you're very welcome to this panel session with Global WEP and Way Forward. So as Yolanda said, I'm Colette Henry. I'm based in Dundalk Institute of Technology in Ireland, and I also have a role at Griffith University in Australia. And I have the honour of chairing the Global Women's Entrepreneurship Policy Research Network. And if you're not familiar with us, we are a group of scholars from over 30 countries, 36 at the moment, who are passionate about women's entrepreneurship from a policy perspective. And through our work, we want to identify any hidden biases in policies to do with entrepreneurship, and just to try and level out the policy ecosystem for women entrepreneurs. So the work that we do research to inform policy. And to date, we've run a number of webinars with the ICSB, with Birkbeck UK, also with the Babson Group, the Diana International Research Group, and with the OECD. And we've published a number of journal articles, books chapters, and also special issues. And in particular, I would draw your attention to a report we produced last year with the OECD, Entrepreneurship Policies Through a Gender Lens. So if you do get a chance, we'd encourage you to read that. And with that, I'd like to hand you over to our panel chair for today, Professor Elena Kryskova. And Elena is with the Institute of Sociology at the Czech Academy of Sciences. So I leave it to you, Elena, to introduce this panel. It looks like it's going to be a very exciting discussion, and I'm really looking forward to it. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Colette. And thank you very much for inviting me to cooperate on this roundtable. Good afternoon from Prague. I am in Czech Republic. So this is afternoon. Some of you might have good morning or good evening, depending on where you exactly are at the moment, because today we do have a truly global panel of speakers, and I hope also of, and I think I see of the audience also. So the panel includes Professor Séverine Leloir-Lemaire from Grenoble School of Management in France. Then we have Dr. Roshni Narendran from University of Tasmania in Australia. And we have Dr. Vahid Makizadeh from the University of Hormozgan in Iran. So the motivation for the topic of this panel is research which shows that gender roles in society and culture can have really negative influences on the scale and the nature of women's entrepreneurship. And to close gender gaps in entrepreneurship, policies and interventions must recognize the stereotypes, and the policies should be contextualized. Context can be in the form of institutions, cultural, social norms, and it has important effects on women's entrepreneurship policies. This can be illustrated, for example, in the case of Czechia, where I am from, by very long parental leave and childcare policies, which very negatively influence the feasibility of entrepreneurship for many women, and where often entrepreneurship is only viewed as an option or work-life balance strategy for women. So Colette already drew your attention to the study Entrepreneurship Policies Through a Gender Lens, which Global Women's Entrepreneurship Policy Research Network wrote together with OECD, and which also highlighted the importance of creating more gender-sensitive entrepreneurship culture. We can put the link to the study to the chat during the panel. I'll do it later. And today we have 3 panelists, and we will be focusing on 3 very different cultural contexts of Iran, India, and France. And we will explore the impact of these cultural contexts on how women entrepreneurs start and operate their businesses. So at the same time, I would also like to encourage everyone to participate in the discussion, and please use the chat function in this call to ask your questions during the discussion of the panelists. And however, we only have 1 hour, so to be really effective, I will have a couple of questions for the panelists first, and then we can discuss and try to respond to your questions from the chat. So my first question concerns the embeddedness of policies within the cultural context, which means that possible change could really take a very long time. So I will first ask Séverine, representing France, what are the most important cultural barriers for women's entrepreneurship in your country? What is the background for women's entrepreneurship in France, Séverine?
Okay, thanks, Elena. Thank you, everyone. To reply to your question, let's start with some key figures. Among 100 entrepreneurs, you will find in France less than 30 entrepreneurs who are women. So women entrepreneurship is below the rate of 30% of entrepreneurship. These figures doesn't increase so much. And if I may, this figure is below the situation in the 70s. We have different explanations for that. The main barriers are, well, to me, the main barriers are, the first one is lots of women decide to create their own venture, right? But remain very, very small ventures that do not really impact the new changes in the new economic changes. So nothing that refers to artificial intelligence, nothing that does refer to green techs or things like this. We mostly deal with service. So the first main challenge is around the topic of women entrepreneurship is women entrepreneurship growth. The second challenge is, like you can imagine in France, we mentioned France, but France is composed of many contexts per se. We have the downtown, which is not the metropole, and in the downtown there is a context of lots of unemployment, and women find it hard to create their own business alone because of their dealing with their own family, etc. And in France, we also face lots of work-life balance issues. So these 2 main points that refer barriers to women entrepreneurship are growth and work-life balance issues.
Thank you very much. Actually, I know that you studied or you also focus on spousal support. And when you talk about work-life balance issues, can you be a little bit more concrete? Because I've been studying entrepreneurship and, for example, of course, the division of work, housework within the couple can influence women's entrepreneurship also, but also policies for work-life balance, right? Which I think in France, they are quite developed and might support women.
Yes, thank you for asking this question. In fact, it's a bit weird because in fact, we have lots of institutional pressure to promote women entrepreneurship in France. We have public and private initiatives, and both are pushing toward the idea that women should create their own business. And so maybe we will mention that point afterwards, but basically the idea is that we promote, we give money, we have networks, lots of roundtables, etc., etc. But basically, all of this idea is, okay, you can do it, develop your own leadership style. And meantime, there are also institutional pressures for women to play like mothers, meaning, okay, maybe you should not, you should pay attention as parents to your education, and we should pay attention to birth rates, because as you know, France is becoming a kind of old country, let's say, and there is a pressure to get more children in a sense. And there are subsidies, of course, if you get more children. So besides, we have the feeling that inside the couple, like you just said, we can find traditional families, religious ones or not, from different religions, by the way, and modern families. And in modern families, there is a kind of spousal support that bring a kind of expected support, meaning that I want to create my business, and maybe my spouse, we decide to take care of, to look after the children, to pay attention to their education, etc. And you have more traditional families in which spousal supports says, okay, I bring money, I bring the network, maybe I do the job for you, and this is a way for me as a male to be, wow, this is awesome, and I'm very proud of my wife. But in fact, you do your own, you realize yourself through your wife. And the women is still has to face many constraints, much pressures from the family, from children, from spousal stuff. I don't know if I answer your question, because we don't have much time.
Yes, thank you very much. Well, let's turn to the context of India. Rashni, can you tell us a little bit about the very different background of India and the main barriers that you identify for women's entrepreneurship there?
Okay, thank you, Elena. The thing is that India has come a really long way in terms of entrepreneurial activities, as well as implementing policies and programs sort of to reduce the gender inequality. But the problem is that there are still a lot of patriarchal-based constraints in India. I will just give, because we are short in time, I will just give a quick example of one particular women entrepreneur that I interviewed in the past. She works in the construction industry, and she's doing very well. It's but she said that it is very difficult for her business to grow further than she has currently, because there are male business owners in her industry that will buy alcohol and share alcohol with their clients. And she feels that it is extremely inappropriate. She feels that culturally for herself, it is inappropriate to do the same. So she feels so male entrepreneurs or male business owners tend to have a greater advantage in terms of building networks. And another barrier that I would like to highlight is that many women entrepreneurs that I have interviewed in the past, many of them do seek assistance from the male members of their family. Alternatively, like for instance, if they want to travel to certain areas, sometimes they will take along somebody with them. So in one particular case, they take along their business partner with them to travel to certain areas, because they sometimes feel a bit unsafe approaching certain people just by themselves. And there are other business owners who take a male employee with them to travel to certain places. So there are a lot of patriarchal constraints that is still very prevalent, that I feel that it could sort of obstruct the further growth of some of these businesses.
Thank you, Rashni. And in your chapter in the OECD study, you very much stress the personal safety of women in India, right? Which is connected to this. Yes, yes. Thank you very much. And Vahid, can you tell us about the background for women's entrepreneurship and the context in Iran and the conditions for women's entrepreneurship, and what are the main barriers that you see?
Excuse me. Thank you, Alena. Iran, as a Muslim context, has many common traits with other Muslim contexts, especially in MENA countries. And you know, in this context, religion has a main role. And but in Iran, we can say that we have an informal tension between society rules, between traditions and real society and government. You know, I think based on my knowledge, Iran's government is conservative, but society is more modern than government. And it's an informal and hidden and long time tension. As an Islamic country, Iran has the same situation like others, such as negative sexist attitudes toward women entrepreneurship, generally in society. And also in this context, women maybe see as a housekeeper, and you know their main role is growing family, supporting children, and being entrepreneurs is unnecessary for them. It's unnecessary for them. But in our research, we find an interesting point, and is that our society in its internal, I don't know, character, respect on female entrepreneurs and respect them as a mother entrepreneurs, female entrepreneurs, and it's a different. I think that it's a different between Iran and some Arabic countries. You know, we have some Persian traditions, some Islamic traditions, and mix of them created a different context. And the final point is that in recent decades, the society started to be changed in, about women in general and their business activities as a specific subject. And another point is that Iran has a different context. You know, Iran is the intersection of different ethnic, religious, and different social class or different geographical zones, and all of them has a different tradition, different history, and different values. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vahid. Now I would like to get to maybe examples of policies, measures, or actions that have been taken in your countries or implemented, which you see had some positive impact or changed the situation for women entrepreneurs and the change in the culture for women. Or if not, if you don't have these some good practice examples, what would you recommend for specific policy changes to overcome some of the cultural barriers? And so, Vahid, you can continue. What do you think would help?
Yes. Generally, Iran has some development plans for more than maybe 7 decades. But these plans don't explicitly refer to Iranian women entrepreneurs. You know, they are silent about gender, generally. But on the other side, we have some initiatives that stems from non-government organizations and some social security organizations. And government has some policy, but these policies may be mainly focused on home-based and small businesses. You know, they define female entrepreneurs as a home-based entrepreneur. You know, everything is created around the family roles, not female as an independent human being, in my opinion. And but generally, I can say that NGOs are more active more than government. And government has some policies that I think that these policies are discontinuous, scattered, and mainly focused on mompreneurs, not female entrepreneurs as an independent kind of entrepreneur. And yes, we have some initiatives like, for example, Entrepreneurship Development Foundation for Women and Young Women. That it's a mix of non-government and governmental plan. And their main aims are identifying entrepreneurs, teaching them mentorship, and giving some considerations to them. But I think that these plans had a limited results. You know, I think that we can't say that, oh, this plan has a huge and considerable impact. Just limited impact because they don't show a specific focus on female.
Maybe women entrepreneurs actually in Iran might be very heterogeneous group, right? So they might, these policies, these governmental policies or NGO policies might focus on different groups or might have different impact, might have impact on just some group of women, right?
Yes, you know, they generally talk about employment, not entrepreneurship.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's also the problem very often. Yes, that's right. Well, Séverine, what about in France? I think there are a lot of initiatives to support women entrepreneurs, but can you identify what works or what doesn't work, and what would you recommend?
Well, if I just try to summarize with and make the comparison with Iran, if I may, in fact, policies, well, we have government policies, but we don't have much pressure from NGOs. However, we identify with a colleague of mine more than 500 networks of women entrepreneurship. So as you can imagine, we stopped counting after the figure 500 because it was too much, but just to give you an idea of the variety and the wide variety of initiatives we might find in France. And the biggest issue with all of these persons who want to create this network, that network, propose this finding, etc., it's just to make sense of all of this mess, if I may, and to be sure that all this mess gets well organized and targets the same issue. And most of the time, when I do observe is a lack of synergies among all of these initiatives. Just to give you some example without naming networks, because it might not be very appropriate, but we can have some networks whose objective is to promote women entrepreneurship, and one other network whose job is to do the same. However, the objective also is a question of brand awareness, and there are some fights among all these networks to get as much budget you can, to get the more awareness, etc., etc. So and while fighting, they tend to forget the essence of their initiative, meaning women entrepreneurship. So I mentioned that point in a very polite way, but just imagine that we are dealing with lots of local, public, regional, etc. initiative all over France. What I also find is, well, the question of employment is not a concern for France, even though we, like in Iran, we know that women faces much more unemployment than males. However, this is not really the question when we focus on the topic of women entrepreneurship, and policies mention that you get more emancipated if you are a woman when you decide to create your own business and to be your own boss. And this policy emerged in 1998 thanks to the Socialist Party, and has been remaining quite consistent till last year. So just to give you an idea, now we have around 20 years of experience of policies to promote women entrepreneurship. And now the question is not to stop, but this is an open question, is not to stop promoting women entrepreneurship, but also to fight patriarchal society per se. Meaning that there are lots of claims around the idea that women should not be raped, should not be killed, especially in the family, especially in more deprived or families, etc. So the government is putting much attention and much effort on that aspect. So the main danger is, why doing it, is maybe the focus on women entrepreneurship in the future will go down, less budget. Of course, we know it's important, but we said, okay, what matters is more to be on life, and the rest, maybe we don't care. So that's the main danger. So to summarize, I would say the main barrier, and if I had to advise something as referred to policy, would be first, be consistent in the policy and don't change your policies over. Second, try to focus on more synergies among networks, just to create a big wave and a consistent wave towards women entrepreneurship. And last, I will just stop me if I don't have time, focus on roundtables, because most of the time, lots of networks in practice promote women entrepreneurship by developing roundtables. This is fine, this is super. I've been invited to take part to this roundtable for many times. It looks very nice for me. But having said that, we made a research on the topic and find out that if you want to increase entrepreneurial intention, roundtable do not really matter. The impact is very low because entrepreneurial intention of women gets generated in France. Why? Just because you have some friends or family who can be males or women, we don't care that, and who had successfully developed their business and who develop strong ties with women entrepreneurs and with women nascent entrepreneurs. So roundtable on investing money, this is super, but maybe the money could be invested elsewhere. So that might be the main difference between Iran and France, I would say.
Thank you, Severin. Yeah, I agree. Well, to really in practice increase women's entrepreneurship, that might not really work. And also what I see very often is focus on motivating women to enter entrepreneurship and not so much helping women to maintain and grow their business, right? To develop their business. It's very much focus on starting businesses. That's at least the case of Czech Republic. Very much focus, start your business, maybe instead of employment, and then not helping women to maintain it. the survival of the businesses and to help them grow. Yeah, I would like to ask Roshni, what policies work and what would you recommend, and maybe what doesn't work for India?
In terms of policies and programs, it's very difficult. From my perspective, it's very difficult to see the real impact. So what I will do is that I will just refer to a study that I conducted recently. So this study is on transgender women entrepreneurs. So it's so for this particular study, I interviewed transgender women, as well as I interviewed government officials and the people who are involved in dispersing certain funds to transgender women. Okay, so what I saw is that the programs or that is provided to the transgender women is not just about employment program or self-employment program. They also look at the holistic perspective. For instance, government also provides sex reassignment surgery. A lot of the transgender women that I have interviewed, they had issues with their family, so they have to leave their home. So in that case, government did provide temporary housing. Then some of the participants that I interviewed were not able to complete their schooling, so government provide education to complete schooling. So and in addition to that, the government also provide training so that they can also start their own business. So my point is that for even like if you're looking at women entrepreneurs, like I mentioned earlier about the cultural barriers, just having programs or programs, just looking at how we can encourage more women to come forward and start business may not be adequate enough. Those programs should also include the cultural barriers or patriarchal barriers, and how to mitigate or how to solve those patriarchal barriers should also be included in those policies or programs, because they might start a business, but if they are finding it really challenging to travel to certain areas for their business purpose, then there is no point in providing them with that assistance, because there is sort of like, it is very difficult for them to, some businesses, it might be very difficult for them to grow if they really have to be physically present and sitting in front of the customers and talking to them. So my point is that we have to look into the policies or programs or whatever the government comes up with should not just look at entrepreneurship or entrepreneurial activities. They should also bring together other important aspects or barriers that women face into the program that is facilitating entrepreneurial activities.
Thank you, Roshni. Yeah, you're right. We really need to focus not only on the entrepreneurship policies, but also the wider welfare state, I would say, or other policies and support, and to see whether this is all consistent together, to use the term used by Severin, right? Whether these all policy elements fit together and support or create other barriers. That's also sometimes the case, right? Well, and my third question is for more research focus or theoretical. Well, I would be interested which theoretical research or policy perspective helps you in your research, and you would recommend it to promote gender-sensitive entrepreneurship culture. Well, we already mentioned the kind of heterogeneity of women entrepreneurs, so it might be the intersectionality perspective, which is very much developing recently. But do you have also other perspectives or what works for you, or what do you think would work also for the policymakers to develop policies that really have impact in practice? Maybe Roshni, you can continue.
Yeah. So one particular point that I did not mention earlier in the cultural aspect that I feel that it is extremely important, especially in this context as well, is that I think Wahid did talk about, like women entrepreneurs, like the married context, and that is what's very, that many people or many studies, when we look at women entrepreneurs, and even if you look at the data that is collected, many of them, majority of them, are actually married women. And I would say that we have to sort of look into, so how is it about with single women? How is it with, single women, single mothers who has a business? So all these women will have different constraints, and many times I think the voice of single women, for instance, sometimes I feel that it is very much hidden, and I would like to see like more research that would look at other perspective, because I even recently read a study that says that women who are married, and they do have support from, some of them do have support from their husbands and kids to run their business. But when it comes to single women, how are they getting that network and support? How are they fighting or combating these cultural challenges? And that's so that's something that I would like more research and policy to sort of focus on. In terms of theoretical, I would like to, because I was talking earlier about transgender women entrepreneurs, so I would like to see more theory from the queer theory background. We have a few studies that focus on feminist theories, so I would like to see that those theories included in our entrepreneurship studies as well.
Thank you, Roshni. Well, Severin, what would you recommend for approaches?
Well, my recommendation will partly follow Roshni's recommendation in a sense that focusing on single women entrepreneurship, I fully agree. But besides, this is a way for me to also claim for a more contextualized analysis. Because when we focus on women entrepreneurship per se as a whole, I was listening to my colleagues. I was thinking of, okay, what's the situation in India? That's super interesting, but what's also the situation in France? And of course, institutions differ. So the comparison is a bit, we have common points. And besides, we could say, no, it's not really the same, because sometimes it's better to be alone. It depends. If you have high income and you decide to create your own job, it's not the same that when you got low income and when you are running out of job. So, there are so many types, and I would encourage maybe to, like you just said, Alena, in your introduction, maybe to focus more on context. So that's why my research is mostly aligned with the study of Friederike Welter's analysis of context. Context beyond intersectionality does matter. I'm convinced about that. And now what I'm trying to do is to explore women entrepreneurship in practice across contexts. So when we claim working on lonely women, fine, okay, definitely agree. Maybe it could be also interesting to focus in rural zones, when you got kids, when you are more than 50, maybe when you are a grandma, and when you need to go back and find a way for your own living, and maybe trying to identify different contexts. And now the question is, well, we cannot explore context as a whole because it's too broad. So where to put the cursor, you know, in a sense. My other request is we do notice that why are we all working on women entrepreneurship? Because we want to promote women's emancipation among family, but also from family, but also from patriarchal societies, but also from big companies, to help women get rid of with this famous glass ceiling effect. And I do know that most of the time, women entrepreneurship is really gendered. And the question is how to de-gender women entrepreneurship. I do know that you can get rid of with many constraints when your business gets aligned with the economy of tomorrow. Meaning green economy, meaning with sustainable economy, maybe low energy, low carbon energy economy, etc., etc. And sometimes what's very frustrating, at least for France, is we do know that most women are not there. They pretend to be there, but, you know, because they are lacking background of technologies. And if I add to well, in fact, I do my best to work on that, is to work with policymakers on how to make women's business more towards the economy of tomorrow and to get their own place without creating in practice this famous model of startups that doesn't lead, well, most of the time we know what's going on with startups. So how to develop and to include more women across different contexts. And the last point I would encourage is to also focus on minority women. I don't know, minority has a different sense in France than in the US, but, you know, the idea is that in deprived economic zones, most of the time women live in ghetto because of their religion belief, because of most of the time they come from immigration. And there is also a duty, and my role is also as a researcher, as a scholar, to better include all these women who are often not considered invisible, you know, in the policy process.
Thank you very much. A lot of recommendations. Yeah, very specific groups of women who are not really addressed by the policies, right? So, Wahid, what would you recommend for Iran? You have recommendations in your study, in your chapter for the OECD web study. Could you tell us about your recommendations for the perspective, for the policy theoretical research perspective to look at women's entrepreneurship in Iran, and what would you think would help?
Yes. In Iran, first of all, I think that we need some fundamental reforms in legal matters. You know, in this context, women have some restrictions, like, for example, mobility rights. You know, based on our religion, Iranian women custody is transferred between father and husband. You know, and I think that this basic concepts like custody, like tamkin in Arabic, you know, this should be changed, because many of women can't do business activity because of this legal matter. They can't, many times they can't travel person, and they have to present permission from her father or her husband. You know, it's a basic constraint, maybe. And also, I think that here, female entrepreneurs need to more organized in NGOs, in some business associations, and female entrepreneurs are scattered and they don't show their organized activities, and they don't support each other. Maybe we can say that they don't have a powerful network supporting each other, supporting female entrepreneurs as a main concern for them. And theoretically, I think that we pay more attention to new theoretical views like intersectionality or some other new theoretical views like ethics of care. As you know, Alena, we, Shomera and me, are working on ethics of care. And based on this theory, we are studying that how female entrepreneurs create value for family from the ethics of care lens. I think that using such theoretical views like ethics of care, intersectional, and also a specific focus on context, as I told before that in Iran we have a different context. North and south of Iran have many different each other in region, in language, maybe some regions, maybe religions, and maybe general lifestyle. We need to pay more attention to this difference between contexts in one context. But I think that if female entrepreneurs have a more organized organization, NGOs for themselves, I think that they can show and they can have a more impact on legal institutions, on some cultural dimensions. They need to be more organized and show more systematic activities. Thank you.
Okay, yeah. Thank you very much, Wahid. And we got to the end of our questions that I had ready for you, and we have 10 more minutes. And actually, now I would like to ask Colette, before we start discussing your questions. I see that you discussed already quite a lot in our chat, which is great. Can I ask you, Colette, first to give us your concluding remarks from this discussion?
Yes, thanks, Elena. And I think this has been quite an inspiring conversation so far. So many insights are being shared, and really what the panel have been doing is sharing their insights on women's entrepreneurship and culture, and indeed policy implications in the 3 different countries, France, India, and Iran. And I think from what I've heard, you've actually highlighted both similarities and differences in how women experience entrepreneurship as a result of respective countries' either historical policies or current prevailing cultures. And I hope now we have slightly a better understanding of how the barriers to entrepreneurship for women can be constructed over time as a result of these embedded cultures. I mean, in terms of France, we heard about the difficulty with work-life balance, that is still a problem for women. In India, we heard about the patriarchal constraints, those are still a big issue. And in Iran, there are these informal societal tensions that impact women's entrepreneurship. And I think what was interesting for me was that when the panel were discussing some examples of policies that either do work or could work. In France, we heard about the plethora of networks that are available to women entrepreneurs, but yet at the same time, there's a lack of synergies between government initiatives and policies. And that's not uncommon in any country, actually, with regard to women's entrepreneurship. And Roshi gave us the example of the transgender women in terms of the research that she did. And where the government are able to come in and offer other support, see the wider picture and pick up on the broader range of issues, not just the entrepreneurial aspects, that can really have an impact. And then also in Iran, we heard about this notion that women's entrepreneurship even today is being contextualized as a home-based initiative and always something that's based around the family. So in fact, what I would suggest is that, you know, even though we appreciate that culture is one of those things that can't be changed overnight, and indeed it will take generations to change cultures, we know too that where there are cultures that are detrimental, we really do need government intervention. We really do need policy initiatives. And this has been an important message from Global Web for quite some time. But it's not all about just any type of policy. It's about getting the right type of policy. So I would just leave you with these 3 brief points. I think the first point is that any policy intervention introduced to mitigate against negative or embedded cultures must involve women in the design, delivery, and evaluation stages. And that seems fairly simplistic, but that actually doesn't happen. We see that all the time. So we need to have women involved in these policies. And the second point, in designing policy interventions, governments need to be mindful of the particular cultural context. And this was mentioned by all of the panel members, that context is so important, because we keep on saying that when it comes to women's entrepreneurship and policy, one size does not fit all. So context is everything. And the final point I would make is that policymakers need to learn from their mistakes. And it's back to getting women involved who can then highlight where things are not working and take corrective action. And I think some of the panel members mentioned that they were unclear about the impact of some of the policies in their countries because there was no evaluation. So learning from the mistakes, ensuring that there is evaluation, and making sure that there's policy exchange. And hopefully today's session has perhaps opened the door for some policy exchange in this regard. So can I just thank you for listening to my comments. Thanks to the panel for a fantastic session. And I'll hand back to you, Elena. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Colette. This was really very important. And thank you for the suggestions, because I think they're very important, and we can continue with those. And I see that in the chat we have a lot of suggestions of studies and also some literature that we can use further, and questions around also low income, for example, of women entrepreneurs, that you discussed it, and that's right. Women should be supported to work in more senior positions, as you suggested in the chat, Colette, and including being the policymakers, right, and being included in those policymaking initiatives, and to be the decision makers, especially when it concerns themselves, women. So there were also mentioned specifically questions about, and Yolanda is just now saying to me directly, but there are questions about how to help women in this specific situation of post-COVID era and the impact of COVID, war in Ukraine, inflation, the economic crisis, simply saying we are in, what would help women in this situation, and or are there any initiatives already specifically focused on women entrepreneurs and help them in this situation? If I may ask our panelists from the chat, as I have seen. So what are the challenges of this post-COVID era, and are there gender-sensitive policies that might help? I don't know which of our panelists would like to respond to this. Severin, you unmuted, so maybe.
In fact, when I read that question, this rings a bell to me. There is a book from one of our colleagues, big scholar, big name in entrepreneurship, whose name is Scott Shane. And I don't know if you remember his book, The Illusion of Entrepreneurship. I don't know, I read it in French. I'm sorry, I cannot remember the main title. And I've been very shocked by some recommendation. Of course, I know they were provocative by essence, but the idea is when it's time to foster economies, while gender doesn't matter anymore, and maybe even worse, it's better not to focus on gender issues as minority issues, because they do not contribute so much to the economy. To me, of course, this is perfectly untrue, but the main recommendation I would give is so far we have lots of subsidies to promote in France, alternative economies, so that we can foster new industries. So how to renew, electric batteries, to get rid of with gas, to foster again nuclear energy, because we lost, of course, competency, etc., etc. And the biggest issues is that you're fully right, women are not on board, and policies once again should also welcome everyone and consider that women, even though they developed supporting businesses, but if we get rid of with that businesses, situation could be worse. And maybe this is because these women entrepreneurs are here, that they do support, I don't know, they are staying behind the economy and they are supporting the economy. So that's my reaction, but it's not really scientific, I admit.
Thank you very much, Severin. Any other reactions to this, Rashni?
Yeah, from a COVID perspective, I can, some of the women entrepreneurs that I have interviewed, they did initially during that pandemic period when there was lockdown, they did, it did have an adverse impact on their business. So there is this one particular business women entrepreneur that I interviewed. She ended up providing broadband facilities to her employees. So she took money from her business and provided broadband facilities so that they can work from home. And also what she did was that she did provide food facilities and also talk to the hospital nearby to see whether they would make at least 2 beds available in case any of her employees become sick. So a lot of, I can see a lot of effort from the women entrepreneurs per se, and some businesses are still struggling a little bit. Like another business, they're still facing some problems in terms of if somebody gets sick, then they will not be. So, for instance, in the construction industry, if one of the one of the employees or one of the contractors who's doing painting or something, he's sick, then that whole job they have to delay it for a few days. So so still COVID is still being impacting many of the entrepreneurial activities. So in addition to so that there are certain things that cannot be really overcome with policies, especially when it comes to the health of individuals. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Rashni and Severin. And actually, we are out of time for this session. And I don't know if Vahid wanted to add something very shortly. But yeah.
Of course. I have just one point about hope. It's just my personal understanding, and I didn't do any specific research focus on COVID. I think that female entrepreneurs show more caring behaviors in their businesses. They were care about their employees, about their businesses, and about their families. I think that they did more caring behaviors. It's just personal.
Thank you very much. Well, women then cared not only about their businesses, but they had to care about children when they had them, and the schools and other institutions were closed, right? So there is a lot of care on the shoulders of women. So we hope the pandemics will not repeat again in the form it was before. And I would like to thank you today for your attention and for your discussion. Thank you all, the three panelists, Rashni, Severin, and Vahid, and thank you all for your attention and also for your lovely discussion in the chat, at least. And this session is recorded, so all the information that you shared in the chat will be also recorded. So thank you very much, and I hope we will meet for the next roundtable that might be organized in the near time. So thank you very much and have a good afternoon, good night, or good morning, wherever you are. Thank you.